Sergeant Major Daniel Whitaker snatched Emily Carter's service record from her hands, held it up in front of the 40 soldiers, and tore it slowly, deliberately, enjoying every second straight down the middle. Then he dropped the pieces into the mud at her boots. "Pick that up," he said. "Frame it, hang it on your wall, because that paper is the last thing about you that will ever matter here." 40 soldiers laughed. Emily did not move, did not blink, did not breathe differently. And Whitaker leaned in close enough that only she could hear him. "Leave," he whispered, "before I make you." If you've ever been destroyed in public by someone who assumed you had nothing left to fight with, this story is for you. Subscribe, hit the bell, and watch until the very end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far Emily's story travels. The day Emily Carter arrived at Fort Liberty, it was the kind of morning that made grown men question their decisions. Not because of the weather, not because of the temperature, but because of what the air itself seemed to carry, a heaviness, a pressure, the invisible weight of a place that had broken thousands of men who believed they were unbreakable. Fort Liberty, North Carolina, the most elite military installation in the United States of America, home to the 82nd Airborne, home to Special Forces units whose names most civilians never get to hear. Home to soldiers who had survived combat deployments in places that don't appear on tourist maps. And on that morning into that world stepped Private First Class Emily Carter. She was 24 years old. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. She arrived with a standard issue duffel bag slung over one shoulder, her uniform pressed with the kind of precise creases that told you she had done it herself, not paid someone to do it for her. Her boots were clean, but not shiny in a way that screamed effort. They were simply clean, functional, ready. She didn't look around when she walked. She looked forward. That was the first thing that Corporal James Holloway noticed when he watched her come through the gate. Holloway had been at Fort Liberty for 6 years. He had seen thousands of soldiers arrive through that entrance. The nervous ones looked everywhere at the buildings, at the other soldiers, at the sky, as though searching for some sign that they had made the right choice. The arrogant ones walked too wide, shoulders back too far, chins lifted, like they were already posing for a photograph. Emily Carter did neither. She simply walked, like she had somewhere specific to be, and she was going to get there, whether anyone helped her or not. Holloway nudged the soldier standing next to him, a massive staff sergeant named Marcus Webb, who had 3 combat tours and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw that he never talked about. "New girl," Holloway said. Webb glanced at her once and looked away. "She won't last 2 weeks," he said. He said it without cruelty. Just the flat, honest assessment of a man who had watched many people arrive with determination and leave with broken pride. He was not trying to be mean. He genuinely believed it. And he would spend the next several months understanding exactly how wrong he was. Emily reported first to the administrative building, a long rectangular structure that smelled of printer ink, floor wax, and 30 years of military bureaucracy. Behind the desk sat a specialist named Rodriguez, who looked like she had processed 10,000 new arrivals and expected to process 10,000 more without a single one of them surprising her. "Name," Rodriguez said without looking up. "Carter. Emily, Private First Class." Rodriguez typed, paused, typed again. Then she looked up for the first time, and something in her expression shifted just slightly, not enough to be called surprise, but enough to notice. "You're assigned to Delta Company," Rodriguez said. "4th Platoon, report to Sergeant Major Whitaker by 0700. "Yes, ma'am." "He's not easy," Rodriguez added. It was not advice. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same tone you might use to warn someone that the road ahead had construction. "I know," Emily said. Rodriguez looked at her for another moment. "You've read about him." "My father talked about him," Emily said. Rodriguez said nothing else. She handed Emily a folder, turned back to her screen, and the conversation was over. But in the hallway outside, Emily paused for just a moment. She pressed the folder against her chest, closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, and then opened them again. Her father. She did not let herself think about him for long. She had learned years ago that grief, if you let it, would sit down inside you and refuse to move. It would take up space that you needed for other things, important things, things like focus and clarity, and the kind of cold-blooded calm that separates the people who survive difficult situations from the people who don't. So she filed the thought away, sealed it, and walked toward Delta Company. Sergeant Major Daniel Whitaker was standing outside the barracks when Emily arrived. He was 61 years old, which in most civilian professions would qualify as approaching retirement. At Fort Liberty, it simply meant he had survived longer than almost anyone else. I was not physically imposing in the way that Hollywood tends to portray military authority. He wasn't enormous. He wasn't screaming. He stood with a stillness that was somehow more threatening than movement. The stillness of a man who had already decided exactly what he was going to do and was simply waiting for the appropriate moment. He looked at Emily the way a stone looks at rain, unimpressed, unmoved, completely certain that whatever was coming, he had seen it before. "Private Carter," he said. "Yes, Sergeant Major." He did not tell her to stand at ease. He let her hold her position while his eyes moved over her with the careful, practiced efficiency of a man who had spent decades learning how to read people from their posture alone. "How old are you?" 24, Sergeant Major. "How long have you wanted to serve?" "My whole life, Sergeant Major." Whitaker clasped his hands behind his back and walked a slow circle around her the way a man circles a car he's considering buying, looking for damage that isn't visible from the front. "I've had men in this unit for 15 years, he said. Men who have been shot at in 3 different countries. Men who have pulled their teammates out of burning vehicles. Men who have done things in service of this country that you will never read about in any newspaper." He stopped in front of her. "What makes you think you belong here?" The question sat in the air between them like a challenge thrown down on the ground. Emily met his eyes. "I don't know if I belong here yet, Sergeant Major," she said, "but I intend to find out." Whitaker's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes moved just slightly, like the first barely visible shift of light before a sunrise. He turned away. "Oh, 500, physical training formation. Don't be late." "Yes, Sergeant Major." He walked away without looking back. Emily let out a single quiet breath. She had no way of knowing that the man walking away from her had spent the previous 2 weeks arguing loudly and with considerable frustration against her assignment to his unit. She had no way of knowing that he had written a formal objection citing insufficient combat experience, insufficient physical testing data, and what he called a fundamental mismatch between the candidate profile and operational requirements. He had been overruled. He didn't know why, and that more than anything else was what made him angry. Daniel Whitaker did not like mysteries. He especially did not like mysteries that arrived in a pressed uniform and looked at him with calm brown eyes that gave absolutely nothing away. That evening, Emily was assigned a bunk in a barracks she shared with 3 other female soldiers, all of whom had more time in service than she did, and all of whom watched her unpack with the particular silence of people who have already formed an opinion but are waiting to see if it will be confirmed or challenged. The first one to speak was Sergeant First Class Diana Torres. Diana Torres was 31 years old, Puerto Rican, and had the kind of jaw that suggested she had been in arguments before and expected to be in more. She was not unfriendly exactly. She was simply direct in the way that people become direct when they have spent years in environments where vagueness gets people hurt. "First time at Liberty?" she asked. "Yes," Emily said. "Where were you before? Training. Fort Jackson first, then some specialized coursework." Torres raised an eyebrow. "Specialized meaning what?" "Language mostly," Emily said, "and some medical." The second soldier specialist, Keisha Williams, looked up from her bunk. She was 27 from Atlanta and had the kind of face that seemed to be permanently processing information before deciding how much of it to share. "Language," Williams said. "What language?" "Arabic and some Pashto." There was a brief silence. "How much Arabic?" Torres asked. "Enough," Emily said. It was not arrogance in the way she said it. It was simply the answer to the question. But Torres and Williams exchanged a quick look, the kind of look that contains an entire conversation compressed into a fraction of a second. The third soldier in the room, Staff Sergeant Rosa Kim, said nothing. She was reading and she continued reading, and she did not look up. But her page turning slowed just noticeably. Emily finished making her bunk with the same precise, unhurried movements she had used to walk through the gate that morning. When she was done, she sat on the edge of it, took a small notebook from her bag, and began writing. "What's that?" Williams asked. "Notes," Emily said. "Notes on what?" "Today," Emily said, "I write down everything I notice and what I need to remember, what I need to do better." Torres stared at her. "You've been here 6 hours," she said. "I know," Emily said. "A lot happens in 6 hours." Torres looked at Williams again. This time the look said something different. It said, "I don't know what to make of her yet." It was in its way the most respectful thing Diana Torres had felt toward a new arrival in 3 years. The first morning of physical training began before the sun. Emily was in formation at 4:52, 8 minutes early. Whitaker arrived at 4:58, looked at the formation and said nothing about the timing. But he saw her standing there, and something behind his expression noted it and filed it away. The run was 6 miles. In most training environments, 6 miles is difficult but manageable. At Fort Liberty, the 6-mile morning run was designed with specific terrain elevation changes, soft ground and a pace that the instructors set deliberately faster than comfortable, specifically to identify who would push through discomfort and who would let the pace defeat them mentally before their body actually gave out. By mile 3, 2 soldiers had fallen behind. Emily had not. She ran in the middle of the formation, not at the front where it would look like she was trying to show off, and not at the back where it would look like she was struggling. She ran in the middle at a steady pace with her breathing controlled and her eyes forward. Corporal Holloway, running 2 positions to her left, watched her from the corner of his eye. He had expected her to be gone by mile 2. By mile 4, he had stopped expecting anything. At mile 5, something happened that nobody anticipated. One of the soldiers of the formation, the 6'2" staff sergeant named Patrick Green, who had been in the unit for 4 years and who ran these 6 miles in his sleep, stepped on a loose section of gravel path, felt his ankle roll, and in the split second between the roll and the fall, made the decision that most experienced runners make. He tried to save the run. I didn't fall, but he landed badly, and everyone around him heard the sound, a small compressed grunt that men who have been hurt make when they don't want to admit they've been hurt. He kept running, but his stride changed, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. Emily noticed. She said nothing at first. She kept pace. At mile 5.5, she moved forward in the formation until she was running beside Green. "Your left ankle," she said, low enough that only he could hear her over the sound of boots hitting ground. "I'm fine," Green said. "I'm not asking," Emily said. "I'm telling you that your left ankle is going to give out before the finish if you keep landing on the outside edge. Shift your weight to the inside." Green looked at her sideways. He had never seen her before this morning. She was a private. He had 4 years and 2 combat deployments, and she was giving him advice. Every instinct in him wanted to say something sharp about rank and experience and keeping her observations to herself. Instead, almost despite himself, he shifted his weight the way she described. The pain decreased, not disappeared, but decreased. They finished the run. When they were done and the formation was dismissed, Green stood for a moment, testing his ankle carefully. Then he looked at Emily. He didn't say anything, but he nodded once. Just once. It was the kind of nod that costs a man something to give when his pride is involved. Emily nodded back and walked away. 2 hours later, in the unit's break room, Holloway told a story to Webb. Webb, sitting with his coffee and his 3 combat tours and his scar, listened to the whole thing. Then he was quiet for a moment. "What did she do after?" he asked. "Went to breakfast," Holloway said. "Sat by herself, read a book." "What book?" "I don't know, something with a lot of pages." Webb drank his coffee. "She didn't tell anyone about Green's ankle," he said. "No." Webb set his mug down. He said, "It was not much." But coming from Marcus Webb, it was practically a speech. The second week brought the tactical evaluations. Fort Liberty's tactical evaluations were not the kind of tests that measured how fast someone could run or how many push-ups they could do. Those things mattered, and Emily had passed them. The tactical evaluations measured something harder to quantify and harder to fake: the ability to make correct decisions when you are tired, when you are uncertain, when the people around you are looking to you for answers, and when the cost of a wrong answer is very, very high. The first evaluation placed Emily in a 4-person team tasked with a simulated reconnaissance mission. Her teammates were Torres, a soldier named Reyes, and a corporal named Davis, who had been at Fort Liberty for 3 years and who did not bother to hide his skepticism about Emily's presence. Davis made his feelings clear in the briefing room. "I've done this evaluation 6 times, he said. "I know how it works. I'm taking point." "All right," Emily said. Davis blinked. He had expected resistance. He had prepared a response to resistance. Emily's simple agreement threw him off balance, and he covered it by turning to the mission map and beginning to talk. Emily listened. She did not interrupt. She did not offer corrections, even when she noticed two significant problems with Davis's proposed route. She asked two questions, both phrased so carefully that they sounded like requests for clarification rather than challenges, and Davis answered them without understanding that he had just been guided to reconsider his own plan. "Why are you asking about the drainage channel?" Davis said, looking at the map where she had pointed. "The briefing notes mention rainfall in the past 72 hours, Emily said. "I just want to understand the terrain." Davis looked at the map, then he looked at the drainage channel on the map, then he looked at where his original route crossed it. "We'd be crossing in the low visibility section," he said, slowly working it out. "Yes," Emily said simply. Torres, watching from across the table, pressed her lips together and looked down at her own notes. Davis changed the route. He did not say that Emily had suggested the change. He presented it to the group as his own adjustment. Emily said nothing about it. She simply nodded and marked the new route on her own map. Torres looked at Emily afterward when Davis had stepped away. "You saw that route problem in the first 30 seconds, Torres said. It wasn't a question. "Maybe," Emily said. "Why didn't you just say something?" Emily looked at Torres for a moment. "Because the mission needed Davis confident," she said, "not defensive." Torres stared at her. "You're playing a longer game," Torres said. "I'm playing the only game that works," Emily said. "The one where everybody gets home." Torres said nothing more. But that evening she stopped reading when Emily came back to the barracks and said, "Good evaluation today." It was the first time any of them had said anything like it to her. Emily looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "Same to you." The mission ran 3 days later. It went well, better than well. They completed every objective, returned within the time parameters, and produced intelligence assessments that the evaluating officers described as, and this was a direct quote passed around the unit afterward, unusually thorough for the team composition. Davis took the credit in the debrief. Emily said nothing. But she watched Captain Ryan Mitchell, the unit's company commander, watching her during the debrief. Mitchell was 35, quiet in the way that experienced leaders often are not because they had nothing to say, but because they had learned to choose very carefully when to say it. He was watching her the way she had watched Davis. She noticed. She didn't react to it, but she noticed. Sergeant Major Whitaker found out about the drainage channel incident 3 days after the evaluation. He found out because Torres told him not to get Davis in trouble and not to advocate for Emily. She told him because Torres was the kind of soldier who believed that people in authority needed accurate information to make good decisions. And she had decided that Whitaker needed accurate information about what was actually happening in his unit. Whitaker listened to the whole account with his hands flat on his desk and his eyes fixed on a point on the wall above Torres's head. When she finished, he said, "Dismissed." Torres left. Whitaker sat alone in his office for a long time. He pulled out the file he had on Emily Carter. He had read it before. He had read it very carefully before her arrival, building the case he had attempted to make against her assignment. He had focused on what wasn't in the file: combat experience, time in service, operational deployments. Now he read it differently. He read what was in the file: language proficiency, Arabic, Pashto, limited Dari. Medical certification, combat lifesaver, EMT basic, academic record degree in applied mathematics, minor in behavioral psychology. And buried in the administrative notes at the back, almost as an afterthought, a single line from a training evaluation conducted at a facility whose name was redacted. Candidate displays unusual situational pattern recognition. Recommend advanced evaluation. Whitaker set the file down. He picked up his phone and dialed an extension he rarely used. The call connected on the second ring. "This is Whitaker," he said. "I need to ask you something about Private Carter." There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice said, "I wondered when you'd call." Whitaker went very still. "You know why I'm calling," he said. "I know why you're calling," the voice confirmed. "Then tell me," Whitaker said. "Who is she, really?" There was another pause, longer this time. "She's exactly who her file says she is," the voice said. "A private first class assigned to your unit." "That's not what I asked." "I know," the voice said, and then the line went quiet. Whitaker held the phone for a moment after the call ended. Then he set it down very carefully. He looked at Emily Carter's file again. He looked at the last name, Carter. He had known a Carter once, years ago, more than a decade ago, a medic with a particular kind of calm under pressure that Whitaker had never seen before or since. A man who had walked into a situation that should have killed him and walked out having saved 17 people. A man who had never come home. Whitaker stood up slowly, walked to his window, looked out at the training grounds where in the distance he could see a small group of soldiers running drills in the fading light. One of them, he realized, was running the drill twice, once with the group, and then when the group finished and went inside alone. He watched her for a long time. Then he went back to his desk, opened Emily Carter's file one more time, and began reading it from the beginning. This time he read every single word. That night in the barracks, Emily sat on the edge of her bunk long after the others had gone to sleep. She had her notebook open in her lap, but she wasn't writing. She was holding a photograph. It was small and slightly worn at the edges, the way photographs get when they've been held many times by hands that needed something to hold on to. The photograph showed a man in uniform. Young, 30-something, with Emily's same calm, direct eyes and the same set to his jaw that suggested he had decided something important long ago and had never needed to revisit the decision. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she put it away. Then she picked up her pen and wrote in her notebook. She wrote day 14, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. She wrote, he would say, keep going. She underlined it. Then she closed the notebook, lay back on her bunk, and stared at the ceiling until sleep came. She did not dream, or if she did, she kept it to herself, just like everything else. Captain Ryan Mitchell made his decision at the end of Emily's third week. He had been watching her long enough to have formed an opinion. The opinion was this: Emily Carter was not exceptional in the way that exceptional soldiers are usually exceptional. She was not the fastest, she was not the loudest, she was not the most aggressive in training exercises or the most willing to take visible, impressive-looking risks. She was exceptional in a way that was much harder to measure. She was the person who made everyone around her better without them understanding why. She corrected problems before they became emergencies. She anticipated complications that other people didn't notice until they were standing in the middle of them. She asked questions that led the person being asked to find their own answers, which meant the answers actually stuck. And she did all of it quietly, without credit, without complaint, and without any apparent expectation that anyone was going to notice. Mitchell had been in the Army for 13 years. He had worked alongside some genuinely exceptional people. He had never worked alongside anyone quite like this. He requested a private meeting with Whitaker. I want to give Carter a field leadership opportunity, Mitchell said. Whitaker looked at him. She's a private, Whitaker said. I know her rank, Mitchell said. Leadership opportunities in this unit go to NCOs, Whitaker said. That's how this works. That's how it has always worked. I know how it works, Mitchell said. I'm asking you to make an exception. Whitaker was quiet for a moment. Why, he said. Because the best way to find out what someone is really made of, Mitchell said, is to put them somewhere they weren't expected to be and watch what they do. Whitaker looked at him for a long time. You're testing her, he said. I'm giving her an opportunity, Mitchell said. Whether it's a test depends entirely on what she does with it. Whitaker picked up his pen, set it down, picked it up again. If this goes wrong, he said, it's my call, Mitchell said. It's on me. Whitaker looked at him. Then he nodded once the way Green had nodded at Emily on the running path, the nod of a man who was giving something that cost him something to give. One opportunity, Whitaker said, and I'll be watching every step. That's all I'm asking, Mitchell said. He stood, gathered his folder, and walked to the door. Then he stopped. Sergeant Major, he said without turning around. What? Whitaker said. You looked up her father, didn't you? The room was very quiet. Dismissed, Captain, Whitaker said. Mitchell left. Behind him, Whitaker sat alone in his office, with the evening coming on, and a folder on his desk that he had read so many times the pages were starting to show it. And somewhere on the training grounds outside, under lights that stayed on until the last soldier decided they were done for the day, Private First Class Emily Carter was running the navigation drill again, by herself in the dark, going over the same terrain she had already covered 3 times that week, because she had decided she hadn't gotten it right yet. And Emily Carter did not leave things she hadn't gotten right yet, not when there was still time to fix them. Not when her father had died, proving that the difference between success and failure, between 17 people coming home and 17 people not, sometimes came down to one person who had prepared just a little more carefully, who had thought just a little more clearly, who had held on just a little longer than anyone expected. She ran the drill in the dark. And somewhere in his office, Sergeant Major Daniel Whitaker, who had torn her record in half on her first morning and expected her to be gone within 2 weeks, sat very still, and for the first time allowed himself to wonder if he had been wrong. The morning after Whitaker tore her file apart, Emily Carter was the first soldier in formation, not second, not third, first. She was standing at parade rest in the dark, alone 6 minutes before anyone else arrived. Her uniform was perfect. Her boots were clean. Her face gave away nothing. When Holloway walked out and saw her standing there by herself in the pre-dawn cold, he stopped mid-stride. He stared at her for a full 3 seconds. Then he looked down at his watch, looked back up at her, and shook his head slowly. He didn't say anything. He just took his place in the formation. When Whitaker arrived and saw the formation, he scanned it the way he always did, left to right, face by face, looking for weakness, for tiredness, for the particular kind of expression that told him a soldier had already decided the day was going to be harder than they could handle. His eyes landed on Emily. She met his gaze without blinking. He moved on. But Davis, standing 3 positions to Emily's left, had watched that exchange. And he leaned toward Reyes and said low enough that it wasn't meant to carry, "She's performing. That's all this is. Watch. By next week, she'll have found a reason to request a transfer." Reyes said nothing, but Torres, standing on Davis's other side, heard every word. She filed it away. Physical training that morning was different. Whitaker had designed it differently, and every experienced soldier in the unit felt the difference the moment the warm-up ended. Instead of the standard run, they were taken to what the unit called the circuit, an obstacle-based endurance course that combined rope climbs, low crawls, load carries, and a final quarter-mile sprint that came at the exact moment when every muscle in your body was already arguing with you about continuing. The circuit was not designed to be fair. It was designed to be exactly as hard as the hardest day you might face in the field, so that when that day arrived, your body already knew the feeling and wouldn't panic. Webb took the first obstacle, a 12-foot rope climb, with the efficiency of someone who had done it several hundred times. He was up and over in less than 15 seconds. Emily reached the rope 6 seconds after Webb. She looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she climbed. She reached the top in 19 seconds, 4 seconds slower than Webb. Davis, watching her come down the other side, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It wasn't quite not a laugh either. 4 seconds, he said to nobody in particular. In a real scenario, 4 seconds gets people killed. Emily heard him. She said nothing. She moved to the next obstacle. The low crawl was 40 meters through a channel that was deliberately designed to feel confining, low ceiling, compressed space, the kind of environment that triggers something primal in human psychology, that has nothing to do with physical fitness and everything to do with whether your mind will let your body keep moving when every instinct is screaming that you need to stand up. 3 soldiers ahead of Emily slowed in the middle of the low crawl. Emily did not slow. She found a rhythm, elbows forward, weight distributed, breathing measured, and she moved through it the way water moves through a narrow channel, not by fighting the space, but by fitting exactly into it. She came out the other side 30 seconds ahead of the soldier who had gone in before her. Whitaker was standing at the exit point. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who is watching a calculation run in real time and is waiting to see whether the result confirms or challenges a number he's been carrying in his head. He said nothing. Emily moved to the load carry. The load carry was 80 pounds of gear, a quarter-mile uphill. By the time Emily reached the midpoint, her legs were burning and her shoulders were making the kind of complaint that you can't turn off by deciding to ignore it. You can only acknowledge it and keep moving anyway. She kept moving. Corporal Holloway, who had finished the load carry 2 minutes earlier and was now watching from the side, crossed his arms over his chest and watched her come up the hill. She was not fast. She was not graceful. She was grinding through it with a particular kind of ugly determination that Holloway recognized because he had felt it himself on his worst days in the field. The determination that had nothing to do with wanting to and everything to do with having decided. She made the top. She set the load down, straightened her back, took 4 controlled breaths. Then she picked it up again and started the second half. Holloway uncrossed his arms. He turned to Webb, who was standing nearby. "She picked it back up," Holloway said. "I see that," Webb said. "Nobody told her she had to do the second half." "I know," Webb said. "The exercise only required the first half," Holloway said. "I know," Webb said again. They watched her in silence for a moment. She's doing the second half because she wants to know she can, Holloway said. Webb said nothing, but he watched her all the way to the finish. The final sprint came at the moment. Emily's legs had the least left to give, which was exactly when Whitaker intended it to come. She crossed the starting line of the sprint, and for the first 20 meters, her body was asking serious questions about whether this was a reasonable thing to be doing. She told her body to be quiet. She ran. She finished the sprint in second place in her group behind Webb, who had the stride advantage of someone 8 inches taller. When it was over, and the group was standing at the finish, catching their breath, Davis was bent over with his hands on his knees. He straightened up, looked at Emily and said, "Lucky morning." Emily looked at him. "It wasn't luck," she said, "and you know it." The directness of it landed harder than anyone expected. Davis's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say something sharp in response and couldn't find the exact right thing fast enough, which made the silence that followed even louder. Whitaker, standing 20 feet away, heard every word. He turned and walked away. But before he did, Captain Mitchell, who had been observing the circuit from a position slightly back from the group, caught the expression on Whitaker's face in that moment. It was not approval, not yet, but it was something that had not been there before. It was interest, real interest, the kind that doesn't perform itself, that exists quietly in the eyes of a man who has spent a career learning to recognize things worth paying attention to. Mitchell made a note in his evaluation log that evening. The note said, "Carter, circuit. Watch the interaction patterns, not just the physical metrics." He underlined it twice. 3 days after the circuit, the leadership opportunity Mitchell had negotiated with Whitaker came in the form of a simulated evacuation scenario. The scenario placed a team of 6 soldiers in a situation where communication had failed. 2 team members were designated as injured and non-mobile, and the team had 4 hours to navigate an extraction route while managing the simulated casualties and making a series of documented command decisions along the way. The catch, which was revealed at the briefing, was that the designated team leader for the exercise had been pulled due to a scheduling conflict. A replacement was needed. Whitaker stood in front of the 6-person team, Emily, Torres, Davis, Williams, Reyes, and a newer soldier named Pacheco, and looked at them one by one. "I need a team lead for this exercise," he said. "This is not a suggestion. This is a test of command decision-making, and I need someone to stand up right now and take it." Davis stepped forward immediately. "I'll take it, Sergeant Major," Davis said. Whitaker looked at him, then he looked at Emily. "Private Carter," he said, "you have the lead." The silence that followed was the kind that has a physical texture. Davis went completely still. Torres pressed her lips together. Williams looked at her feet. Reyes and Pacheco exchanged a glance that they both immediately regretted, because Whitaker's eyes moved to them with the speed and precision of a man who has been catching soldiers exchanging glances for 30 years. Davis recovered first. "Sergeant Major," he said, and there was something in his voice that was struggling very hard to remain respectful and was not entirely succeeding with respect. "She's a private." "I know her rank," Whitaker said. "I assigned it." He looked at Davis for a long moment. "Problem," Davis said, "no Sergeant Major." But his jaw was doing something complicated. Whitaker turned back to the group. "You have 4 hours," he said. "Go." He walked away before anyone could say another word. Emily stood in front of her team. 5 soldiers who between them had more than 30 years of combined service. Looking at her, waiting. She took one breath. Just one. "All right," she said. "Torres, I need you on point. You know this terrain better than anyone here. Reyes, you're managing the casualty. Carry on the north rotation. I'll take the south. Davis, I need you behind Torres, watching the flanks and calling out anything she might miss, because she's going to be focused forward." Davis stared at her. "You're putting me behind Torres," he said flatly. "You have the best field awareness of anyone on this team besides Torres herself," Emily said, and she said it without hesitation, without flattery, simply as a statement of operational fact. "I need that awareness behind her, not at the front competing with it." Something shifted in Davis's expression. It was very small, almost invisible, but it was there. "Williams, Pacheco, you're managing the gear rotation and documentation," Emily continued. "Every decision I make gets logged by Williams. Every deviation from the route gets noted by Pacheco. If I make a mistake, I need to know the exact moment it happened. Clear?" "Clear," Williams said. Pacheco nodded. Emily looked at the group. "Let's move," she said. They moved. For the first 40 minutes, the exercise went according to the planned route. Torres was exactly as good at point as Emily had predicted. She moved with the careful reading efficiency of someone who had spent years learning to gather information from terrain, and Davis behind her called out 3 potential hazard points that Torres confirmed she had also noted. The first time Davis called something and Emily said, "Good catch noted," he didn't respond. The second time he said, "There's a better line about 20 meters east." "Show me," Emily said immediately. He showed her. She looked at it. "You're right," she said. "We take the eastern line. Torres adjust." They adjusted. Davis said nothing after that, but the way he moved changed. It was subtle, the difference between a man fulfilling a role he resents and a man fulfilling a role he's decided matters. The difference showed in the quality of his attention, in the way he started calling hazards before Emily had to ask, rather than waiting to be prompted. The twist came at the 2-hour mark. One of the evaluators, a senior NCO named Sergeant First Class Garza, who played the role of scenario adjudicator, appeared on the route and announced, "Situation update. One of your extraction points has been compromised. You have 30 minutes to identify and reach an alternate." He handed Emily a map with the compromised point marked. Emily looked at the map for 15 seconds. Then she looked up. "What do you see?" she asked the group. "The alternate is 6 kilometers north," Reyes said, looking at his own copy. "It's going to be tight on time." "It's not the alternate I'd choose," Emily said. Everyone looked at her. "There's a secondary position here," she said, pointing to a location on the map that was not marked as an extraction point. "It's not on the official route, but it meets the criteria." "It's not on the route," Davis said. "The criteria don't specify the route," Emily said. "They specify the requirements. This location meets every requirement." Davis looked at the map. "You sure about that?" he said. "No," Emily said. "I'm not sure. I'm assessed." "That's different." She looked at the group. "This is a command decision. I need to make it now. We take the secondary position." She paused for exactly 1 second. "Unless someone has information I don't." Nobody spoke. "Then we move," Emily said. They moved. Garza, the adjudicator, followed at a distance, making notes. They reached the secondary position with 11 minutes to spare. Garza walked up and looked at Emily. "How did you identify this position?" he said. "The scenario briefing mentioned infrastructure built before the official route was established," Emily said. "This position predates the route, which meant it was suitable before the current criteria were written, which meant it was suitable now." Garza looked at her for a moment. "You caught that of the briefing," he said. "I read the briefing 4 times," Emily said. Garza made a note. He said, "Good," and walked away. Torres looked at Emily. "You read the briefing 4 times," Torres said. "It was a long briefing," Emily said. Torres laughed. It was a short sound, involuntary, the kind of laugh that escapes when something surprises you in a way you weren't expecting to be surprised. Davis had his back to both of them, but his shoulders had changed. The tension that had been in them since the moment Whitaker had assigned Emily the lead had done something, not disappeared, but settled the way a man settles into a position when he stops fighting the ground and starts working with it. He turned around. "Next time," Davis said, "tell me you read the briefing 4 times before we go out." "Why?" Emily said. "Because then I'd have read it 5 times, he said. It was the closest thing to a joke Emily had heard from Davis since her arrival. She looked at him. "Deal," she said. That evening, Whitaker received Garza's evaluation report. He read it once, then he read it again. Then he picked up his phone and called Mitchell. "She identified the secondary position," Whitaker said without preamble. "I heard," Mitchell said. "Garza says the last team to run this scenario didn't identify it," Whitaker said. "That was a team of 5 NCOs with a combined 18 years of service." "I know," Mitchell said. "She's a private," Whitaker said. Not the way Davis had said it, with resentment. The way a man says something he's still processing. "Yes," Mitchell said. There was a pause. "She also gave Davis the flank position," Whitaker said. "I know," Mitchell said. "She put the most resistant member of her team in the role where his specific skills were most needed," Whitaker said. "And she framed it as an operational necessity rather than an authority decision, which meant he actually performed the role instead of fighting it." "Yes," Mitchell said. "That's not private-level thinking," Whitaker said. "No," Mitchell said. "It isn't." The line was quiet for a moment. "What do you know about her father?" Whitaker said. Mitchell was quiet. "Enough," he finally said. "Tell me," Whitaker said. "I can't," Mitchell said. "Not yet, but Whitaker, just watch her. That's all I'm asking." Whitaker set his phone down. He sat in his office in the dark for a long time. I was thinking about a medic he had known 20 years ago. A quiet man who had been assigned to his unit under similar circumstances. A transfer that didn't quite make sense on paper from a background that didn't quite fit the expected profile with a file that told you the facts but not the full story. That man had saved 17 soldiers and had never come home to be thanked for it. Whitaker pulled open his desk drawer. In the back behind his operational notebooks, in his spare reading glasses, was a photograph. It was old and slightly faded. It showed a group of soldiers in a staging area mid-deployment, caught in the informal, unposed moment between official functions. Most of them were laughing. In the back left of the frame, slightly apart from the group, was a man with his arms crossed and his eyes watching something off camera. Watching with that particular kind of calm attention. The same kind of calm attention Whitaker had seen in Emily Carter's face since the moment she had arrived. He looked at the man in the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at the name on the file on his desk. Carter. He closed his eyes. He had known. Since the file first landed on his desk, some part of him had known, and he had deliberately not allowed himself to follow the thought to its conclusion, because following it meant confronting something he had been carrying for a long time. The night sergeant, first class, Andrew Carter, had died. Whitaker had been 3 miles away coordinating extraction for a different element. He had heard the radio calls. He had heard the situation deteriorate. He had heard at the end the silence that meant the situation had resolved in the only way it could, given what Andrew Carter had chosen to do. He had written the after-action report. He had recommended the commendation. He had never met Andrew Carter's daughter until now. He opened his eyes. He stood up, walked to his window, looked out at the training grounds. In the distance, under the lights that stayed on until the last soldier was done, a single figure was running the navigation drill, alone, for the 3rd time that week. Whitaker watched her for a long time. Then he said very quietly to nobody in particular, "He would have been proud of you." He turned away from the window. He picked up Emily's file. He opened it to the first page, and he wrote in the margin in his own handwriting 3 words. 3 words that he had not written in a soldier's file in 11 years. The words were, "Watch this one." He set the pen down, and then he did something that Sergeant Major Daniel Whitaker had not done in longer than he could accurately remember. He sat down in his chair, put his face in his hands, and felt in the privacy of his empty office the full weight of a grief he had never allowed himself to properly carry. For Andrew Carter, for all the things Andrew Carter had never gotten to see, and for the daughter who had arrived at his base unknown and underestimated, carrying every bit of her father's quiet, unbreakable strength. He allowed himself 45 seconds. Then he straightened up, picked up his pen, and got back to work, because that was what you did. That was what soldiers did. You carried the weight. You kept moving, just like Emily Carter was doing right now out there in the dark, running a drill she had already run twice, because she had decided she hadn't gotten it right yet. The next morning, Davis arrived at the formation early. Not as early as Emily. Nobody was ever as early as Emily, but early. He took his position without speaking. When Emily arrived 2 minutes later and took hers, Davis looked at her once. Then he faced front. Before the formation was called to order, he said just loud enough for her to hear, "Secondary extraction point. I went back and checked the briefing last night. You were right about the infrastructure reference." Emily looked straight ahead. "I know," she said. "I would have missed it," Davis said. "You would have caught something else," Emily said. "You always do." Davis was quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn to read briefings like that?" he said. Emily was quiet for a moment. "My father," she said. Davis said nothing more, but when the formation was called, he stood a little straighter. And 3 positions away, Torres, who had heard the whole exchange, allowed herself one small private smile. The situation shifted again 4 days later in the medical evaluation bay, where the unit conducted quarterly trauma response certifications. The certification required every soldier to demonstrate proficiency with combat casualty care, tourniquet application, airway management, wound packing, and a final simulation that placed them in a mass casualty scenario and measured their triage decision-making. Emily had listed her EMT basic certification in her file. She had not elaborated on it. The instructor running the certification, a senior medic named Staff Sergeant Lopez, ran the sessions group by group, with each soldier performing their practical evaluation while the rest of the group observed. When Emily's turn came, Lopez presented the scenario. A simulated mass casualty event. 3 casualties with different injury profiles. Limited supplies. 2 minutes to triage, prioritize, and initiate treatment. Emily looked at the scenario for 3 seconds. Then she moved. What happened next was difficult for the watching soldiers to fully process in real time because it happened so quickly and with such calm, economical precision that it took several seconds after Emily finished to reconstruct exactly what she had done. She had triaged all 3 casualties in under 40 seconds, correctly identifying the order of intervention. She had applied the tourniquet on the first casualty in 11 seconds. She had managed the airway on the second in 8. She had packed the wound on the third and communicated the full status report with supply requests and evacuation priorities in the remaining time. Lopez stopped his stopwatch. He looked at the number. He looked at Emily. "Where did you get your EMT certification?" he said. "Fort Worth," Emily said. "And then I did the TCCC advanced course online and the field practicum in San Antonio." "How long ago?" "2 years. "You've been keeping current every 6 months," Emily said. Lopez looked at the stopwatch again. Then he looked at the group. "For reference," he said in the tone of a man who has made a decision to share information because it is more valuable shared, "the unit record for that triage scenario is 1 minute 42 seconds. He paused. Carter's time was 1 minute 9. Nobody spoke. Webb, standing at the back of the group, uncrossed his arms. Holloway looked at the floor. Davis stared at nothing. Torres looked at Emily with an expression that had moved completely and without reservation past skepticism. Emily stood quietly, not triumphant, not performing humility, just standing there present and steady the way she always stood. Like someone who had known she could do the thing, had done the thing, and was now ready to move on to whatever came next. Lopez made a note in his certification log. "Outstanding," he said simply. Emily nodded once, and then she stepped back and let the next soldier take their turn, because it was their turn, and that was what you did. That was what her father had taught her without ever sitting her down and formally teaching her anything. He had taught her by being the kind of man who stepped forward when he was needed and stepped back when he wasn't. Who made others better not by outshining them, but by creating the space and the conditions in which they could be their best. She had watched him do it for the first 14 years of her life, and she had spent the 10 years since trying to become worthy of what he had shown her. That evening, the 3 women in the barracks were quiet in a different way than they had been before. Not the silence of assessment, not the silence of people withholding judgment, the silence of people who had reached a conclusion and were still absorbing what it meant. Kim was the one who finally broke it. She set her book down. She looked at Emily. "Your father was military," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Emily said. Medic," Emily said. Kim nodded slowly. "Is that why you went EMT?" Torres asked from her bunk. "Partly," Emily said. She didn't elaborate, but something in her face told Torres that the rest of the answer lived in territory that Emily had decided long ago was hers alone to inhabit. Torres respected that. "He trained you," Torres said. "He showed me things," Emily said. "I trained myself." Williams from her bunk said, "Why here? Why this unit?" Emily looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she said, "Because this is where the work is." It was the kind of answer that sounded simple and was actually very complicated, and all 3 of the women in that room were experienced enough to understand the difference. They went back to their various silences. But before Torres turned off her light, she said, "Carter." "Yeah," Emily said. "Tomorrow, the land navigation exercise. Whitaker's going to push the timeline." "I know," Emily said. "You prepared?" Emily was quiet for a moment. "I went over the terrain maps twice today," she said. "I'll go over them once more tonight." Torres was quiet. "Then wake me up when you do. I'll go over them with you." In the darkness, Emily turned toward Torres's bunk. "You don't have to do that," Emily said. "I know," Torres said. "I want to." There was a pause. "All right," Emily said. "Well, yeah." 1 hour, Torres agreed. William said from her bunk without looking up, "Wake me up too." Kim turned a page. "Same," she said. Emily lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling. Something that had been held tightly inside her chest for the 3 weeks since she had arrived, something she had not named, because naming it would have meant acknowledging how alone she had felt, loosened just slightly. Not disappeared, but loosened. Like a knot that has been tested enough times in enough different directions that it has finally remembered how to release. She closed her eyes. She would let herself have this. Tomorrow, the work would start again. Tomorrow, Whitaker would push the timeline on the navigation exercise. Tomorrow, Davis would be there watching, and Mitchell would be observing, and Whitaker would be doing the thing he always did, standing at the edges, measuring, calculating his face, giving nothing away while his eyes recorded everything. But tonight, for 1 hour, she would sit with 3 soldiers who had decided to show up for her. And that was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything her father had ever told her that real service looked like. Not the medals, not the recognition. This exact thing. The land navigation exercise began at 0430, which meant Emily had been awake since 0200. Not because she couldn't sleep, because she had chosen not to. She, Torres Williams, and Kim had spent that first hour reviewing terrain maps the night before, just as they had agreed. But after the others went back to sleep, Emily had stayed up. She had the maps spread across her bunk in the dark, using a small red lens flashlight that wouldn't disturb anyone, going over every contour line, with the focused, patient attention of someone who understood that the difference between a map and the actual ground was the most dangerous gap in any mission. Her father had told her that once. He had said the map will tell you what should be there. Only your feet will tell you what is. She had memorized the maps. Now she needed to memorize what the maps couldn't tell her. When Torres woke at 0345 and saw Emily still bent over the bunk with the red light, she said nothing for a moment. She just watched. Then she got up, made 2 cups of instant coffee from the hot water tap set, one beside Emily without comment, and started reviewing her own notes. They worked in silence for 40 minutes. It was one of the most companionable silences Emily had experienced since arriving at Fort Liberty. Not the silence of people tolerating each other, the silence of people who had stopped needing to perform for each other and had gotten down to the business of preparing. When they left for the formation at 0415, Torres said, "You ready?" "Yes," Emily said. "You nervous?" Emily thought about it for one honest second. "Yes," she said. Torres looked at her. "Good," Torres said. "Nervous means you understand what's at stake." Emily looked back at her. "My father used to say that," she said. Torres said nothing more, but she walked beside Emily the whole way to the formation, and that said enough. Whitaker had not told anyone the specific parameters of the navigation exercise until that morning. He announced them with the flat efficiency of a man who has designed something specifically and is not interested in commentary about the design. The teams would be pairs. They would be given a start point and 3 waypoints to locate, with a final extraction point as the destination. They had 5 hours. The terrain was mixed open ground, wooded sections, 2 creek crossings, and 1 elevated ridge that anyone who had studied the maps would know to approach from the east rather than the west. The pairs would be assigned by Whitaker, not chosen by the soldiers. Davis immediately looked at Torres. Torres kept her eyes forward. Whitaker announced the pairings. Torres with Reyes, Williams with Pacheco, Kim with a soldier from the 2nd Squad named Foster, Davis with Webb, and then Carter. "You're with me, Wong." The formation went absolutely still. Even Webb, who had the emotional expressiveness of a granite countertop, blinked once. Whitaker looked at Emily. Emily looked at Whitaker. "Yes, Sergeant Major," she said. Whitaker turned to address the whole group again, describing the rules and the timing and the consequences of failing to reach the extraction point within the window. But nobody was really listening to the rules anymore, because every soldier in that formation had just understood something that changed the entire nature of the exercise. Whitaker wasn't going to observe Emily from a distance today. He was going to be 3 feet behind her. The whole time, Davis caught Emily's eye as the formation broke. His expression said clearly and without words, "I do not envy you right now." Emily gave him a look that said, "I know." Then she turned and fell into step beside Sergeant Major Daniel Whitaker, and the 2 of them walked toward the starting point in a silence that had weight and texture, and the particular quality of 2 people who are both in different ways measuring the distance between where they stand and where the truth is. They reached the start point. Whitaker handed Emily the mission packet. "Lead," he said, just that word, "lead." Emily opened the packet, read it in full. 45 seconds. She oriented the map to terrain with 3 reference points, identified the first waypoint, calculated a primary and alternate route, and noted the creek crossing that would need to be addressed at the 90-minute mark. "First waypoint is north-northeast, approximately 2.4 kilometers, she said. "Primary route follows the ridgeline east and descends to the tree line. The direct route is shorter but crosses exposed ground during the first kilometer. Why does that matter? Whitaker said. The exercise parameters mention time pressure, but not exposure risk, Emily said. In a real scenario, exposed ground during a navigation mission creates vulnerability. I'm applying operational thinking rather than just exercise thinking. Whitaker said nothing. We take the ridge route, Emily said. She moved. He followed. They walked for 20 minutes in silence. Emily set the pace steady, sustainable, the pace of someone planning to go the full distance rather than burning energy in the first hour and paying for it in the fourth. She took compass readings every 8 minutes. She noted terrain features as they passed them and cross-referenced against the map. She made one adjustment to her route at the 14-minute mark, stepping off the planned line to avoid a section of ground that looked solid but had the particular dull color that experienced walkers learn to associate with instability under the surface. Whitaker noticed the adjustment. Why the deviation, he said. Soil color, Emily said. The drainage pattern from the ridge suggests water accumulation in that section. The ground may not hold weight reliably. Whitaker looked at the section she had bypassed. He did not say anything, but he made a note in the small notebook he carried in his left breast pocket. They reached the first waypoint at the 43-minute mark, which was 4 minutes ahead of a pace that Emily had privately calculated as acceptable. She confirmed the waypoint with the verification code on the marker, logged it in the mission packet, and immediately began orienting toward the second. What's your assessment of the timeline? Whitaker said. We're 4 minutes ahead, Emily said. I want to bank that time rather than push the pace. The creek crossing at the 90-minute mark will cost time regardless of how we approach it. Better to have buffer going in. Why will it cost time? Whitaker said. Because the water level after the rainfall this week will make a dry crossing unlikely, Emily said. We'll get wet. Wet boots and clothing add weight and reduce pace efficiency for the remainder of the exercise. I want our decision-making to account for that rather than be surprised by it. Whitaker was quiet for a moment. You checked the rainfall data, he said. 3 days ago, Emily said, when the exercise was announced. Whitaker made another note. They moved toward the second waypoint. At the 60-minute mark, something happened that was not in the exercise parameters. A soldier from another pair came out of the tree line ahead of them, moving fast. And when he got close enough, Emily could see it was Pacheco, and his face had the tight, controlled expression of someone managing a situation that has gotten harder than expected. Sergeant Major, Pacheco said, reaching them. Williams went down, left ankle. She was moving along the ridge and the edge gave way. She's mobile, but she's compromised. Whitaker looked at Pacheco, then he looked at Emily. Your call, he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a test within the test. Emily looked at Pacheco. How far back, she said. 150 meters, maybe 200, Pacheco said. Can she bear weight? Yes, but slow. Is she in pain or is she managing it? Pacheco thought for a second. Managing it. She's not making noise about it. That means she can move with support, Emily said. Not that she's fine. She looked at Whitaker. We go back. That puts us behind on the timeline, Whitaker said. I know, Emily said. The exercise doesn't require you to assist other pairs, Whitaker said. I know, Emily said. We go back. She was already moving before Whitaker finished the sentence. They found sitting against a tree trunk, her boot off, pressing her hands against her ankle with the specific concentrated focus of someone deciding how much a thing actually hurts versus how much they're going to let it matter. She looked up when Emily arrived. I'm fine, William said immediately. I can see that, Emily said, kneeling in front of her. Let me look at it anyway. She examined the ankle with quick, practiced hands. Not rough, not performative, just efficient and careful in the way that Emily's EMT training had made efficient and careful feel like the same word. It's a grade 1 sprain, Emily said. Maybe low grade 2. Nothing's unstable. You can move. Told you, William said. You can move with support, Emily said, which means we're going to modify how we move. She stood. Good. Pacheco, you're on her left side. I'll take the mission packet. We adjust our route to minimize elevation change for the next kilometer. Williams looked at her. You're going to fall behind because of me, Williams said. We're going to finish because of you, Emily said. The exercise is about completing the mission. The mission just changed shape. Williams stared at her. That's not how Whitaker runs these exercises, Williams said. Emily looked at Whitaker. Whitaker was standing 8 feet away, watching his face doing the thing it always did, revealing nothing, recording everything. How does he run them? Emily said, not to Williams. To Whitaker directly. Whitaker met her eyes. I run them the way the field runs them, Whitaker said. The field doesn't stop for injuries. The field doesn't abandon injured soldiers either, Emily said. The words landed in the space between them. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Whitaker said, You're burning time. Yes, Sergeant Major, Emily said. She helped Williams to her feet. They moved. The next 40 minutes were the hardest of the exercise. Emily had modified the route to reduce elevation changes, which added distance. Williams was moving, but not at full pace, and every slight irregularity in the ground required adjustment. Pacheco was steady and reliable on Williams's left, and Emily managed the navigation and the mission documentation simultaneously, which meant she was doing 2 cognitive tasks at once without letting either one degrade. Whitaker walked behind them. He watched Emily check the compass and simultaneously check Williams's footing and call out terrain features to Pacheco, all in a continuous, unbroken stream of attention that never prioritized one thing at the expense of another. He had seen senior NCOs who couldn't do what she was doing. He had seen officers with combat experience who couldn't do what she was doing. He kept walking. He kept watching. He did not write in his notebook again because he had stopped writing notes and started simply observing, which was what you did when what you were watching was more complex than notes could capture. They reached the second waypoint 11 minutes behind the pace Emily had set. She logged it without commentary, reoriented immediately, and said, We make up 6 minutes on the next leg if we push the descent. Williams, tell me honestly, can you handle an increase in pace on downhill terrain? Williams tested her ankle once, a small, deliberate weight transfer. Yes, she said. Tell me the second that changes, Emily said. I will, Williams said. I'm not asking to be polite, Emily said. I'm asking because the decision I make in the next 30 seconds affects all 3 of us, and I need accurate information. Williams looked at her. I'll tell you, she said, and she meant it. Then we push, Emily said. They pushed. At the creek crossing, the water was exactly as cold and exactly as high as Emily had predicted 3 days earlier, when she had checked the rainfall data. They crossed in the shallowest section, which Emily had already identified on the map and confirmed with a visual assessment before they entered. Pacheco and Emily maintained contact with Williams through the crossing, and they came out the other side, wet to the knee, in 6 minutes behind the original pace, which meant they were 5 minutes ahead of where Emily had expected to be, given everything that had happened. She had built the buffer. It had been used, but not completely. The third waypoint was located and confirmed at the 3-hour and 20-minute mark. 1 waypoint left, 1 hour and 40 minutes on the clock. Williams's pace had actually improved in the last 30 minutes. The movement had paradoxically helped. The ankle kept it from stiffening, kept the blood moving. She was not at full speed, but she was closer to it than she had been an hour ago. When they stopped for a 2-minute water break, Whitaker stepped up beside Emily. Remaining distance to extraction, he said. 1.8 kilometers, Emily said. 53 minutes at current pace. Gives us a 47-minute buffer. Or Whitaker said, you leave Williams with Pacheco and cover the last leg at full pace. Reach extraction with 1 hour and 15 to spare. Emily looked at him. No, she said. That's an order, Whitaker said. The air between them went tight. Emily held his gaze. With respect, Sergeant Major, she said, and her voice was steady and clear and not 1 degree louder than necessary. Abandoning a compromised team member 47 minutes from the finish line is not a decision I'm willing to make when the margin doesn't require it. The exercise, Whitaker began. The exercise will be completed, Emily said. All 4 of us will complete it. If the mission parameters genuinely required me to leave Williams, the mission parameters would not permit a 47-minute buffer. She paused for 1 breath. I'm not leaving her, Sergeant Major. Whitaker looked at her for a long time. Long enough that Pacheco, standing nearby, shifted his weight uncomfortably. Long enough that Williams, watching the exchange, held her breath without realizing she was doing it. Then Whitaker said, move out. He stepped back. Emily turned to the group. Let's go, she said. They moved. They reached the extraction point with 31 minutes remaining on the clock. All 4 of them. Emily logged the final confirmation code in the mission packet and handed it to the evaluating NCO at the extraction point. a master sergeant named Hollins who had been running these evaluations for 8 years. Hollins looked at the packet. He looked at Williams's ankle. He looked at Emily. "You assisted another pair," he said. "Yeah," Emily said. "That's not in the parameters," Hollins said. "No," Emily said. "It isn't." Hollins looked at Whitaker. Whitaker said nothing. Hollins made a note in his evaluation log. "Debrief in 30, he said, and walked away. In the 30 minutes before the debrief, the other pairs returned to the extraction point in sequence. Torres and Reyes had finished first as expected. Torres was the best navigator in the unit, and Reyes had the endurance of someone who found normal exercise insufficiently challenging. Davis and Webb had finished second, which surprised nobody, though Davis caught Emily's eye when he arrived, and his look asked a question his mouth didn't ask out loud. The question was what happened out there, Emily answered with a small, slight tilt of her head toward Williams. Davis looked at Williams, understood, said nothing. The debrief was conducted by Whitaker himself, which was unusual. Typically, Hollins ran the debrief and Whitaker reviewed the written reports afterward. The fact that Whitaker was standing at the front of the room when they all filed in told every experienced soldier in that group that something had happened out on the course that had changed the shape of the day. Whitaker debriefed each pair methodically. He addressed route selection, timing decisions, communication patterns, and the specific choices each pair had made when their plans encountered real terrain. He left Emily and Whitaker's pairing for last. When he got to it, he said, "Carter, walk me through your decision to assist the Williams-Pacheco pair." Emily stood. "Williams sustained a grade 1 ankle sprain at approximately the 60-minute mark," Emily said. "The pair had functional mobility but degraded pace efficiency. Abandoning them to complete the exercise independently would have saved approximately 20 minutes. That 20 minutes was not necessary to complete the mission within parameters. The decision to assist was an operational choice based on available margin." "You defied a direct order," Whitaker said. The room went very still. "Yes, Sergeant Major," Emily said. "Explain that," Whitaker said. "You ordered me to leave Williams and complete the final leg independently," Emily said. "I assessed that order against the operational reality and determined that the mission could be completed with the team intact. Leaving a compromised soldier with 47 minutes of buffer was not a tactical necessity. It was a test." The room was completely silent. "You're saying I was testing you," Whitaker said. "Yes, Sergeant Major," Emily said. "And I'm saying that the correct response to a test of whether I'll abandon my people when it isn't necessary is to not abandon my people." Whitaker looked at her for a long, measured moment. "And if you were wrong," he said, "if the buffer had been tighter, if Williams had deteriorated, if the weather had changed, then I would have been wrong," Emily said, "and I would have owned it completely. But I wasn't wrong, and I knew I wasn't wrong because I had done the math, I knew the terrain, and I knew Williams." She paused. "Leadership isn't about following orders when they're easy. It's about knowing when an order exists to test your judgment and having the confidence to trust that judgment even when the safer choice is to comply." Whitaker said nothing for a moment. "Then sit down, Carter." She sat. The room breathed again. Whitaker looked at the group. "What Carter described," he said, "is the single hardest thing I teach in this unit. Knowing when to follow orders and when your judgment is the order." He paused. "Most soldiers in this unit took 3 to 5 years to develop that understanding." He looked at Emily once, just briefly. "Most of them." He closed his evaluation notebook. "Dismissed," he said. In the hallway afterward, Torres grabbed Emily's arm. "Did you know," Torres said, "when he gave the order to leave Williams, did you know it was a test?" "I thought it was," Emily said. "But you weren't certain," Torres said. "No," Emily said. "And you defied a direct order from a sergeant major, anyway," Torres said. "Yes," Emily said. Torres stared at her. "That could have ended your career before it started," Torres said. "I know," Emily said. "But you did it anyway," Torres said. "Williams needed to finish," Emily said simply. "That was the whole thing. That was the only thing." Torres let go of her arm. She looked at Emily for a long moment with an expression that had traveled a long distance from the careful assessing neutrality of Emily's first day in the barracks. "Your father," Torres said quietly. "He was like this." It wasn't a question. Emily looked at her. "I hope so," she said. Torres nodded once, slowly. The kind of nod you give when something has been confirmed that you already believed but needed to hear confirmed. She walked away. Emily stood in the hallway alone for a moment. Then Mitchell appeared from around the corner. He had been in the debrief. He had been at the back of the room, and Emily had known he was there. She had seen him when she walked in, but she had not let it change anything about what she said or how she said it. Mitchell looked at her now. "You knew I was in this room," he said. "Yes, sir," Emily said. "Did it change anything?" he said. "No, sir," she said. Mitchell studied her face. "Carter," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly." Emily looked at him. "What happened today?" he said. "The navigation, the decision with Williams, the debrief. That wasn't just good performance." He paused. "That was the kind of thing that changes what's possible for you in this uniform." Emily held his gaze. "I just did my job, sir," she said. "I know," Mitchell said. "That's exactly what I mean." He walked away. Emily stood in the empty hallway. She pressed one hand flat against the wall, beside her, not for support, just to feel something solid. She took one breath, just one. Then she straightened up and walked back toward the barracks. She had notes to write. The day wasn't done. What she did not know as she walked back through the hallways of Fort Liberty that afternoon was that Mitchell had gone directly from that hallway to a secure communications room on the second floor of the headquarters building. He had placed a call to a number that was not in the unit directory. The call had connected in 2 rings. He had spoken for approximately 4 minutes, and the person on the other end had said very little. When Mitchell was done, the voice on the other end said, "She's ready." Mitchell said, "She's been ready. We've been the ones who needed convincing." There was a pause. "When?" the voice said. "Soon," Mitchell said, "but there's one more test." "The final evaluation," the voice said. "Yes," Mitchell said. "She doesn't know what it really is," the voice said. "No," Mitchell said. "She doesn't." The voice was quiet for a moment. "Make sure she's prepared without knowing she's being prepared," the voice said. "That's already happening," Mitchell said. He ended the call. He sat in the communications room for a moment looking at the wall. He thought about Andrew Carter. He thought about what Andrew Carter had done and what it had cost him and what he had never gotten to see as a result. Then he thought about Emily Carter standing in a debrief room, looking Whitaker in the eye and telling him clearly and without apology that she had made the right decision. He allowed himself something that was almost a smile. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and went back to work. 4 floors below, in the basement records room of the headquarters building, a sealed file sat inside a locked cabinet, inside a room that required 2 separate authorizations to enter. The file had a name on the outside. The name was Carter Andrew J. Operations Silent Ground Commendation Record Classified. It had been sitting in that cabinet for 12 years, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the day when someone would decide it was time to bring it into the light. That day was coming. Emily Carter didn't know it yet, but somewhere in a room that she had never entered, the full story of her father was waiting for her. And it was going to change everything she thought she already knew. The week after the navigation exercise, Fort Liberty felt different. Not in any way that could be measured on paper or reported in an evaluation log or quantified in the kind of language that fills official military assessments. It felt different the way a room feels different after something important has been said in it. The walls haven't changed, the furniture hasn't moved, but the air carries a memory of what happened, and everyone who walks through the door feels it without being able to name it. Emily felt it most clearly in the way people moved around her. Not with deference, not with the exaggerated respect that gets performed when someone wants you to know they've noticed you. Something quieter than that, something more real. The kind of shift that happens when a group of experienced people update their assessment of someone and don't quite know yet what to do with the updated information. Davis had stopped making comments, not because he had been told to stop, because somewhere between the drainage channel and the navigation exercise and the debrief room where Emily had looked Whitaker in the eye and held her ground, Davis had run out of the particular fuel that powers skepticism. Skepticism requires a target. It requires someone who is still trying to prove themselves. And Emily had stopped trying to prove herself somewhere around day 4. She had simply been herself consistently in every situation under every pressure, and there was nothing for skepticism to grip onto. He still wasn't warm. Davis was not by nature a warm man, but he was watching her now the way Webb watched her, with the careful, genuine attention of someone who has decided that watching this person is worth the effort. That was its own kind of respect. Torres had moved past respect into something closer to partnership. In the evenings, when the day's work was done, she and Emily often reviewed the next day's requirements together, without anyone suggesting they do it without any formal arrangement, simply because it had become the thing they did, and it made both of them better, and that was reason enough. Williams had recovered from the ankle sprain faster than expected, and had told Emily once quietly that she had not forgotten what happened on the navigation course. She had not said thank you. She had said something more specific. You didn't make me feel like a liability. Emily had nodded and said nothing more about it, and Williams had appreciated that too. Kim, who was the quietest of the four and the one who had taken longest to move from observation to engagement, had begun doing something small, but consistent. She saved Emily a seat at the briefings. She never announced it. She never made it visible. She simply put her notebook on the chair beside her when she sat down, and when Emily arrived, the chair was there. It was the kind of gesture that costs nothing and means everything, and Emily understood exactly what it meant and never said a word about it. The unit had changed shape around her, not because she had demanded it and not because anyone had instructed it, because that is what happens when someone with genuine character operates consistently in a contained environment over enough time. The environment adjusts to the person doesn't adjust to the environment. Her father had told her that too. She had been 12 years old, sitting in the kitchen doing homework, and he had been at the counter making coffee, and she had asked him why some people seemed to change everyone around them without even trying. He had thought about it for a moment, and then he had said, because they're not trying to change anyone. They're just being exactly who they are, completely without apology. And when people see that, they remember that they could be doing the same thing, and some of them start. She had not fully understood it at 12. She understood it now. The final evaluation was announced on a Tuesday morning. Whitaker made the announcement at the end of the regular formation after the day's assignments had been given and the administrative items had been addressed with the casual efficiency of someone mentioning a schedule change, rather than the thing that every soldier in the unit had known was coming and had been quietly calculating their readiness for since the first week. End of the month, Whitaker said. Full operational scenario evaluation, multi-element, multi-phase. Details will be distributed Thursday, that's all. He dismissed the formation, the walkway filled with the controlled noise of soldiers breaking from formation, and inside that noise were the specific subcurrents of a unit that had just been told the clock was running. Torres fell into step beside Emily immediately. You heard the timeline, Torres said. Yes, Emily said. That's 9 days, Torres said. I know, Emily said. You ready, Torres said. Emily was quiet for exactly 1 second. Ask me in 9 days, she said. Torres looked at her sideways. That's not a no, Torres said. It's not a yes either, Emily said. It's an honest answer. Torres nodded slowly. Good, she said. Honest is what we need right now. The briefing documents distributed on Thursday were 43 pages. Emily read them 4 times, which Davis had apparently predicted, because when she mentioned the number at breakfast the following morning, he said obviously, without looking up from his food, and Webb sitting across from him made a sound that might have been a laugh. The evaluation structure was more complex than anything the unit had run during Emily's time at Fort Liberty. It was a 3-phase scenario: intelligence gathering, operational execution, and extraction under pressure. Each phase had its own evaluation criteria and its own designated team composition, and the compositions had been deliberately scrambled. Whitaker had mixed experience levels, specialties, and relationships in a way that made it clear he was testing how the unit functioned as a genuinely integrated system, rather than a collection of individual performers. Emily was designated as element lead for Phase 2, operational execution, the most technically demanding phase, the one where command decisions would have the highest consequence within the scenario parameters. Dave read the composition list when it was posted. He found Emily's designation. He walked to the mess hall where Emily was sitting alone reviewing the briefing documents for the second time, and he sat down across from her without asking. Phase 2 lead, he said. Yes, Emily said. You know what that means, Davis said. It means if Phase 2 goes wrong, it's on me, Emily said. And if Phase 2 goes right, Davis said, it changes what happens to you after this evaluation. Emily looked up from her documents. What do you mean, she said. Davis looked at her for a moment. You don't know, he said. Know what? Emily said. Davis was quiet for a second in the way of someone who has just realized they may know something the other person doesn't and is calculating whether sharing it is the right move. Mitchell has been submitting evaluation notes upward, Davis said. Not just the standard reports, separate assessments to someone above his pay grade. Emily was still. How do you know that? She said. Rodriguez in admin, Davis said. She processes the outgoing communications. She didn't tell me what was in them. She just mentioned they existed. Emily looked down at her documents. That doesn't mean anything specific, she said. No, Davis said. But Whitaker has been receiving calls from a restricted number twice a week since your second week here. And Garza told me the scenario design for the final evaluation was altered after your navigation exercise debrief. Added complexity, specifically in phase 2. Emily was quiet. They're not testing whether I can pass, she said slowly. They're testing something else. Yes, Davis said. What? Emily said. Davis looked at her steadily. I don't know, he said, but I think you should. He stood up. He picked up his coffee. He walked away. Emily sat for a long moment with the briefing documents open in front of her, but she wasn't reading them anymore. She was thinking about the sealed file in the basement records room that she didn't know existed. She was thinking about the phone calls she didn't know about and the evaluation notes she didn't know had been sent. She was thinking about the fact that she had arrived at Fort Liberty believing she knew exactly what she was walking into and was only now beginning to understand how much of the picture she had been missing. She closed the documents. She picked up her notebook. She wrote, "Something is happening that I don't have full information about. Work with what I know. Prepare for what I can prepare for. Trust the preparation." She underlined the last 3 words. Then she opened the briefing documents again and started reading from the beginning. The 9 days before the evaluation were the most demanding of Emily's time at Fort Liberty, not because the training intensity increased, though it did, but because of the specific quality of pressure that comes from knowing that everything you have done up to a fixed point is building toward a single moment of assessment that cannot be repeated or revised. Whitaker drove the unit hard during those 9 days, not cruelly, with a specific, purposeful intensity of a commander who understands that the only thing that prepares people for high-pressure performance is repeated exposure to high-pressure conditions in a controlled environment where the consequences of failure are recoverable. He ran night exercises. He introduced communications blackouts during scenarios. He changed the rules mid-exercise twice, without warning, without explanation, and watched how each element adapted or failed to adapt. Emily adapted every time, without complaint, without visible frustration. On the 7th evening during a communications blackout drill that had run 3 hours past its scheduled end time when every other element had returned to base, and Emily's team was still in the field, managing a cascading series of scenario complications that Whitaker had added specifically because her team was the one that could handle them. Torres said to Emily in a low voice, "This is deliberate. He's running us past the others on a purpose." "I know," Emily said. "Why?" Torres said. "Because he needs to see the ceiling," Emily said. "He needs to know how far we go before we start making bad decisions." "And," Torres said, "and we haven't found it yet," Emily said. Torres looked at her. "Is that good or bad?" Torres said. "Both," Emily said. "Keep moving." They kept moving. They returned to base at 2300 hours. Whitaker was waiting at the entry point. He looked at Emily. He said, "Good." Just that word. Emily had been at Fort Liberty for 6 weeks. She had been evaluated by this man in every possible way. A soldier can be evaluated formally and informally, under every kind of pressure he could manufacture. He had torn her file in half on her first morning. He had assigned himself as her navigation partner. He had given her a direct order she had refused. He had pushed her team past every other element's limit to find a ceiling she apparently didn't have. And he had said good, one word. One word that cost Daniel Whitaker something to give, and that meant more because of what it cost him than it would have meant coming freely from anyone else. Emily said, "Thank you, Sergeant Major." She walked past him into the building. He watched her go, and in the privacy of the empty entry point, with nobody watching, the man who had spent 6 weeks deciding whether to believe in Emily Carter allowed himself to believe in her. Completely, without reservation. The evaluation began on a Friday morning at 0500. Phase 1 ran without significant incident. The intelligence gathering element performed well, and the data they produced was clean and usable, which mattered because Phase 2, Emily's phase, depended entirely on the quality of what Phase 1 handed them. Bad intelligence in Phase 1 would have meant impossible decisions in Phase 2, regardless of how well Emily's element performed. The intelligence was good. Emily received the Phase 1 handoff at 0730. She had 6 personnel, Torres Davis, Webb, Reyes, Pacheco, and a soldier from First Squad named Okafor, who Emily had worked with only twice, but who had demonstrated in both instances the particular combination of composure and physical capability that made him exactly what Phase 2 required. She briefed the team in 4 minutes. Not 4 minutes of filler, 4 minutes of precise, specific instruction that told each person exactly what they were responsible for, exactly what the success criteria were, and exactly what Emily would need from them at each of the 3 decision gates the scenario had built in. Davis listened to the briefing with his arms crossed and his eyes tracking every point she made. When she finished, he said, "Gate 2, you've got a 20-minute window between Phase 1 and the objective. What's the decision protocol if the window closes before we reach the gate?" It was a good question, a necessary question, the kind of question that reveals whether a leader has thought past the plan to the failure modes of the plan. Emily answered without hesitating. "We abort the direct approach and shift to the alternate. It adds 12 minutes to total phase time but keeps all decision gates reachable. If we lose the Gate 2 window on the direct approach and try to force it, we compromise Gate 3 and the extraction. The alternate is slower but recoverable." Davis uncrossed his arms. "Good," he said. Webb said nothing. But he was already moving toward his position when Emily said, "Move out," which meant he had made his decision before the order was given. That was the best kind of soldier, the kind who is already committed. Phase 2 opened cleanly. The team moved with the integrated efficiency of people who had spent 6 weeks learning each other's rhythms and had arrived at the kind of mutual understanding that doesn't require continuous communication, because everyone already knows what everyone else is going to do. Emily moved at the front of the element, which was not where she was most comfortable, and was precisely why she had put herself there. She had learned from every exercise and every debrief and every hour of preparation that the most important thing a leader can do under pressure is be visible to the people who are depending on them. Not visible in the sense of being seen. Visible in the sense of being present, readable, steady. She was steady. The first decision gate came at the 40-minute mark. The scenario adjudicator, a master sergeant named Hollins, who Emily recognized from the navigation exercise extraction point, appeared and announced, "Situation update, civilian element at the objective, non-combatants, 4 individuals. Scenario parameters require their protection." Emily processed it in real time. "New priority," she said to the team. "The objective doesn't move. The approach does. Davis, I need an assessment of the eastern axis in the next 90 seconds. Davis was already moving to assess. "Torres, hold the current position." Nobody moves until Davis reports. Davis came back in 68 seconds. "Eastern axis is viable," he said. "Tighter, but it keeps the civilian element clear of the primary approach corridor." "We take the east," Emily said. "Adjust." They adjusted. Webb on the right flank recalibrated his position without being told, because he had already identified the implication of the eastern approach on his angle of coverage. Emily saw him move and said nothing because there was nothing to say. He had done exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. She made a note in her decision log. Webb anticipates implication, trust his judgment on coverage decisions. They reached the objective with the civilian element intact and the primary mission criteria met. Gate 2, Hollins appeared again. "Situation update, communications are down. You have 30 minutes to complete the objective and initiate extraction without external support." Torres looked at Emily. Emily looked at the objective. She said, "Clock starts now. Okafor, you're managing the civilian element through the extraction corridor. Reyes, Pacheco, you're with him. Webb, Davis, Torres, objective with me." 30 minutes is tight," Davis said. 28 is tighter," Emily said. "Move." They moved. What happened inside the objective was the most technically demanding 9 minutes of the evaluation, and Emily made 4 command decisions in that window. Each of them under time pressure, each of them with consequence within the scenario, and each of them correct. Not correct because they were the textbook answer, correct because they were the right answer for the specific conditions of that specific moment, which is a different thing entirely and the harder thing to achieve. When they came out of the objective and linked up with Okafor's element at the extraction corridor, they had 11 minutes left on the clock. Davis looked at the time. He looked at Emily. "You know you just did something that the last 3 teams to run this phase didn't do," he said. "What's that?" Emily said, already moving toward the extraction. "You kept all of them," Davis said. "Every element. Civilian protection, objective completion, team integrity. Nobody left behind, nothing left undone." Emily moved. "That was the mission," she said. "That's not the point," Davis said, keeping pace beside her. "The point is most people have to sacrifice one to complete the others. You didn't." Emily said nothing for a moment. Then, "My father used to say that the mission parameters tell you what you have to do. Your character tells you how much of it you're actually going to do." Davis was quiet. "He sounds like he was something else," Davis said. "He was," Emily said. They reached the extraction point with 4 minutes and 17 seconds remaining. Gate 3. Hollins was there. And this time Hollins was not alone. Standing beside Hollins was Captain Mitchell. And standing beside Mitchell, in the kind of formal military bearing that signals something entirely outside the normal scope of a training evaluation, was a figure Emily did not immediately recognize. A figure in a uniform that carried the weight of an authority that had nothing to do with Fort Liberty's training command. Emily's team came to a halt. "Evaluation complete," Hollins said. And then unusually he stepped back. Stepped entirely out of the evaluator role. Mitchell stepped forward. He looked at Emily. "Private Carter," he said, "come with me." Emily looked at her team. Torres gave her a small nod that said, "Go." Davis said nothing, but his face said it's time. Emily didn't know what it was time for. She followed Mitchell. They walked away from the extraction point, away from the team toward the headquarters building, and the figure who had been standing beside Hollins fell into step on Mitchell's other side, and Emily could see now that this person was a colonel, Colonel Thomas Reynolds, whose name she had seen in the unit's command documentation, but whose face she had never encountered directly. They walked in silence for 30 seconds. Then Reynolds said, without looking at her, "Do you know why you were assigned to this unit, specifically Private Carter?" "No, sir," Emily said. "Not even a guess," Reynolds said. "I've had thoughts," Emily said, "but no confirmed information." Reynolds glanced at Mitchell. Mitchell looked straight ahead. "When we get inside," Reynolds said, "there's something I need you to see." Emily said, "Yes, sir." She kept her face composed. She kept her breathing even. But inside something that she had been carrying for 6 weeks, the awareness that there was information she didn't have, that there was a shape to what was happening around her, that she could see the edges of, but not the center, that thing tightened in her chest with the particular pressure of a moment that is about to become something you cannot unknow. Whatever was in that building, it was going to change things. She didn't know how, she didn't know what. But she had spent 10 years learning to walk toward the things that were hardest to walk toward, because that was what her father had done. And because she had decided a long time ago that the best way she knew to honor him was to become someone who did not flinch. So she walked. The records room in the basement of the headquarters building required 2 authorizations to enter. Reynolds provided both. The room was small and climate-controlled, with locked cabinets along 2 walls and a table in the center. On the table when they entered, there was already a file, a sealed file, old enough that the edges of the folder had developed the slightly soft, compressed quality of paper that has been undisturbed for a long time. Emily looked at it from across the table. She could see the name on the outside of the file from where she stood. Carter Andrew J. Her breath left her body. Just once. Just one involuntary exhale. Then she pulled it back and stood straight. Reynolds looked at her. "Take as much time as you need," he said. She crossed to the table. She stood in front of the file for a moment. Then she opened it. The first page was the operational report, classified with the classification markings still visible despite the age of the document. The operation name was listed at the top, Operation Silent Ground. The date was 12 years ago. Emily had been 14 years old. She read slowly, which was not her natural pace, but this was not a briefing document, and it was not a map, and it was not an evaluation parameter. It was her father's name on every page, and she needed to read it the way it deserved to be read. The report described a rescue operation in a location that was still redacted. A forward element had been cut off. Communications had been compromised. The situation had deteriorated faster than the operational planning had accounted for, and by the time the full picture of what was happening had reached the command level, the options for external support had narrowed to a single narrow window that was closing fast. Sergeant First Class Andrew Carter had been the unit medic. He had not been assigned to the rescue element. He had volunteered. Emily turned the page. The report described what her father had done with the specificity of a document written by people who understood exactly what they had witnessed and wanted the record to be unambiguous. He had moved through compromised terrain 3 times. 3 separate movements, each one back into a situation that any rational assessment of the circumstances would have described as unrecoverable. He had extracted injured soldiers. He had treated casualties in the field under conditions that the report's language described with careful military restraint as extremely hostile. He had made decisions that the report's author noted in language that Emily could see had been chosen carefully, exceeded the parameters of his assigned role, and reflected a command-level understanding of the operational situation. He had gotten 17 soldiers out. He had not come out himself. Emily turned to the last page. The commendation recommendation was there, and below it something she had not expected. A letter, handwritten, not part of the official documentation, attached afterward by someone who had felt the official documentation was insufficient. The letter was dated 11 years ago, 1 year after her father's death. It was addressed to the family of Sergeant First Class Andrew Carter. Emily began to read it. She got 4 sentences in. Then she stopped. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She stood very still for a moment with the letter in one hand and her other hand against her mouth and her eyes fixed on the page, doing the thing she had taught herself to do when grief tried to move faster than she could manage it. She breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. Then she lowered her hand and kept reading. The letter was written by a man who had been one of the 17 soldiers her father had saved. He had written it because he had 2 daughters at the time of writing, and he was watching them grow up, and he could not stop thinking about a man who had a daughter who was growing up without him, and he had needed the family to know, needed it with the specific urgency of someone who understands that some things must be said out loud, must be put into written words, must be sent to the people who need to receive them, that Andrew Carter had not simply performed a mission. I had made a choice, over and over again, in a situation where every rational, survivable choice pointed in the other direction. He had made the choice to go back, and then to go back again, and then to go back one more time. Not because he had been ordered to, not because the mission required it, because there were people in that situation who needed someone to come back for them, and Andrew Carter had decided with the quiet, unshakable clarity that the letter's author described as the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen in another human being, that he was going to be the person who came back. Emily finished the letter. She set it down carefully on the table. She stood with her hands flat on the table surface and her eyes closed. In the corner of the room, Reynolds and Mitchell stood without speaking. They had read the file before. They knew what was in it. They gave her the time the moment required. After a long while, Emily opened her eyes. She looked at Reynolds. "Why now?" she said. Her voice was steady. "Why show me this now?" Reynolds looked at her directly. "Because you've spent 6 weeks proving that you earned the right to know the full story," he said. "And because there are people who need to meet you, who have been waiting a long time to meet you." Emily looked at him. "What people?" she said. Reynolds glanced at Mitchell. Mitchell said, "There's a ceremony tomorrow morning. You're required to attend in dress uniform." "What ceremony?" Emily said. "You'll understand when you get there," Mitchell said. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the file on the table, at her father's name. She reached out and touched the cover of the file with 2 fingers, just briefly, just long enough to feel the physical reality of it. Then she straightened up. She looked at Reynolds. "Will I be able to keep a copy?" she said. Reynolds said, "The file will be transferred to your custody after tomorrow." Emily nodded. "Thank you, sir," she said. Reynolds said, "Don't thank me, Private Carter. You earned access to this the same way your father earned the content of it." Emily said nothing. She looked at the file one more time. Then she turned and walked out of the room. In the hallway outside, she stopped. She pressed her back against the wall. She tipped her head back. And for exactly 30 seconds, in a basement hallway in the headquarters building of Fort Liberty Private First Class, Emily Carter allowed herself to feel completely and without management the full weight of everything she was carrying. Her father's courage, his choice, the 17 people who had come home, the one who hadn't, the 10 years she had spent becoming someone worthy of his name, The 6 weeks she had spent proving it to people who hadn't known where to look. And tomorrow, whatever tomorrow was, she felt all of it. 30 seconds, then she straightened up, wiped her face once with the back of her hand, and walked toward the stairs. She had a dress uniform to prepare, and Andrew Carter's daughter did not show up to anything unprepared. Emily pressed her dress uniform that night 3 times, not because it needed it after the second, because her hands needed something to do while her mind worked through everything that had been placed inside it that afternoon in the basement records room. The iron moved back and forth across the fabric in steady, even strokes, and she focused on that. The weight of it, the heat, the simple physical reality of a task with clear parameters and a measurable result. Torres sat on her bunk and watched without saying anything for a long time. Then she said, "You going to tell me what happened in that building?" Emily set the iron down. She was quiet for a moment. "They showed me my father's file," she said. Torres went very still. "Operation Silent Ground," Emily said. "Classified, 12 years old." She picked up the iron again. "He saved 17 soldiers. I knew he died on a mission. I didn't know the full shape of what he did." Torres said nothing. "He went back 3 times," Emily said, "into a situation that should have killed him on the first approach. He kept going back." She pressed the iron flat against the uniform. 17 people came home. The room was completely quiet. Williams had stopped reading. Kim had set her book face down on her bunk. Nobody spoke. Emily finished the uniform. She hung it carefully, turned around, and looked at the 3 women in the room with her. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "I don't know exactly what's happening. Mitchell said a ceremony. Reynolds said there are people who've been waiting to meet me." She looked at her hands for a moment. "I don't know what I'm walking into." Torres said, "We'll be there." Emily looked at her. "You don't know where it is," Emily said. "Then we'll find out," Torres said simply. Williams said, "Whatever it is, you don't go alone." Kim said nothing. But she picked her book back up, turned to the page she'd been on, and then closed it entirely and set it on the nightstand, which for Kim was a statement. Emily looked at all 3 of them. She thought about her father's letter, about the man who had written it because he had daughters and needed the family to know, about what it meant to have people who showed up. "Thank you," she said. It was the most she had said about any of it. It was enough. She turned off her light. She lay back on her bunk. She did not sleep for a long time, but when sleep finally came, it came completely, the way it comes to people who have done everything within their power to prepare and have made their peace with the fact that preparation is the only part that belongs to them. The rest belonged to tomorrow. She was in dress uniform at 0545. She had not been told where to report. She had been told to be ready at 0600 and that someone would come for her. At 0558, there was a knock at the barracks door. It was Sergeant Major Whitaker. He was in dress uniform as well. Every ribbon, every badge, every element of his service record, rendered in the precise formal language of a uniform worn for a ceremony that matters. He looked at Emily standing there in her own dress uniform, and something moved through his expression that he did not attempt to conceal. He said, "You ready?" "Yes, Sergeant Major," Emily said. He looked at her for one more second. Then he said quietly in a register that had nothing to do with rank or authority, "Your father would have been proud of you. I want you to know that before we go in there." Emily held his gaze. "Did you know him?" she said. Whitaker was quiet for a moment. "Not well enough," and he said, "but I knew what he did. I was 3 miles away when it happened." He paused. "I wrote the after-action report." The hallway was silent. "You recommended the commendation," Emily said slowly. "Yes," Whitaker said. "You've known since I arrived," she said. "I suspected since I saw your name on the transfer order," he said. "I confirmed it when I pulled the file." He looked at her steadily. "That's why I pushed you harder than anyone else. Because I needed to know, I needed to see with my own eyes that you were here because you belonged here, not because of him." Emily looked at him, and she said, "Yes, I am." Whitaker straightened slightly. "You belong here," he said. "You belong here more than most people I've seen in 30 years. Emily breathed once. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," she said. He nodded. "Let's go," he said. They walked together through the early morning quiet of Fort Liberty dress uniforms and measured steps, and Emily felt the weight of the morning in a way she hadn't felt anything since she had first walked through the gate 6 weeks ago. This was different from the weight of training, from the weight of evaluation, from the weight of proving herself to people who had already decided she couldn't. This was the weight of something being completed. Something that had started 12 years ago, in a place whose name was still redacted in a classified file, when a man had looked at an impossible situation and made a decision that cost him everything. She felt him walking beside her, not literally. She was not someone who reached for that kind of comfort easily. But she felt the shape of him, the specific gravity of a person whose choices have become part of who you are, so thoroughly integrated into the way you think and move and decide that separating yourself from them is no longer possible. She had not been trying to replace him. She had been trying to continue him. And this morning, whatever this morning was, felt like the moment that project was going to be seen by people who understood what it meant. The building Whitaker led her to was not the headquarters building. It was a smaller structure set apart from the main complex used for formal functions and official ceremonies. The kind of room that gets its floors polished and its chairs arranged in precise rows and its flags positioned with the specific care that says what happens here is going to matter. Outside the entrance, Mitchell was waiting. He looked at Emily. He said, "Before we go in, there are 3 people in that room you haven't met. I need to prepare you." "Who are they?" Emily said. "General Michael Hayes," Mitchell said. "Commander, Special Operations Command." Emily processed that. "General Rebecca Lawson," Mitchell continued. "Former Deputy Chief of Staff, the most decorated female officer in the current generation of American military leadership." Emily was very still. Mitchell paused. "And retired General James Carter," he said. Emily looked at him. The name hit her the way the file had hit her the afternoon before, not as a surprise exactly because some part of her had already been moving toward this, but as a confirmation of something she hadn't dared to fully form into a thought. "Carter, my grandfather," she said. "Yes," Mitchell said. Emily looked straight ahead for a moment. "He never reached out," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact being processed in real time. "He made a decision when you were young," Mitchell said. "After your father died, he decided that the best thing he could do for you was let you become yourself without his shadow over you, without people knowing who you were connected to." Mitchell paused. "He's been watching your career since you enlisted. Every posting, every evaluation, every transfer." Emily absorbed that. "He arranged this assignment," she said. "He requested it," Mitchell said. "There's a difference. The assignment required independent confirmation that you were qualified. That confirmation came from every evaluation you have completed since you walked through the gate." Emily was quiet for a long moment. "He wanted me to earn it," she said. "He needed you to earn it," Mitchell said. "For your sake, not his." Emily looked at the door. Then she looked at Whitaker, who was standing slightly back, giving her the space this moment required. Then she looked at Mitchell. "Let's go in," she said. Mitchell opened the door. The room was arranged with chairs in a semicircle facing a small raised area at the front. In the chairs sat soldiers, some in dress uniform, some in service uniforms, and Emily recognized faces as she walked in. Torres Williams Kim, standing along the left wall exactly as Torres had promised. Davis arms crossed, standing beside Webb, whose scar caught the light and whose expression was the most open Emily had ever seen it. Holloway, Reyes, Pacheco, Okafor, Lopez from the medical bay, Garza from the evaluations, Hollins from the extraction point. The entire unit, every person who had watched her arrive 6 weeks ago as the new girl nobody counted, all of them here. Standing, at the front of the room, 3 figures, 2 in uniform, 1 in civilian clothes, but carrying himself with the posture of someone who had worn a uniform for so long that removing it had not changed the fundamental architecture of how he stood. General Michael Hayes was 63 years old, with the compact, dense build of a man who had never stopped training, and the kind of face that suggested he had made enough hard decisions to have stopped finding them surprising. He watched Emily walk in with calm, evaluating eyes. General Rebecca Lawson was 58 tall, with close-cropped silver hair, in a uniform that carried more ribbons than Emily had ever seen on a single person in proximity. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back and watched Emily with an expression that was warm, in the way that genuinely powerful people are warm, not performed, not managed, simply present. And the third figure, retired General James Carter, was 71 years old. He had Emily's eyes. Not the color exactly, but the quality, the particular kind of calm directness that looks like stillness from the outside and is actually on the inside a continuous process of observation and assessment that never stops. Emily saw him, and stopped walking for exactly one step. One step. Then she kept moving. She came to a halt 6 feet in front of the three of them and came to attention with the precision of someone who has done it 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. Private First Class Emily Carter reporting as ordered, sir, she said. Hayes stepped forward. At ease, Private Carter, he said. She moved to parade rest. Hayes looked at her for a moment with the kind of look that has traveled a long distance to reach this point. 6 weeks ago, he said, you walked into this installation as the lowest-ranking soldier in your unit. You had no combat deployments, no operational history, no connections that anyone here knew about. He paused. What you had was a record of preparation that was frankly unusual and a name that meant something to people in this room. He looked at her steadily. We needed to know if you were the name or if you were yourself, he said. We needed to see which one showed up every morning. Emily said nothing. What showed up, Hayes said, was someone who made every soldier around her better without asking for credit. Someone who made the right decision when the wrong decision was easier and safer. Someone who defied a direct order from a sergeant major because her judgment told her the order was a test and her character told her the correct answer to that test was to not leave her people. He paused. I have commanded men and women in this uniform for 31 years, Hayes said. I have seen genuine leadership perhaps a dozen times in that span. Genuine leadership, not performed leadership, not career-managed leadership. The real thing. He looked at her. You are the real thing, he said. Emily held his gaze. She did not let it show on her face what those words did inside her chest. But it was there. General Lawson stepped forward. Leadership is not about rank, she said. Every manual says that. Every training program teaches it. And almost nobody actually believes it until they see it demonstrated by someone who wasn't supposed to be leading anything. To add Emily with an expression that had the particular quality of one woman recognizing something in another that most people around them have underestimated. You demonstrated it, without authority, without rank, without anyone's permission. She paused. That is the rarest thing in any organization, military or otherwise, she said, and it deserves to be recognized. Then the room went quiet, because James Carter stepped forward. He had not spoken yet. He walked slowly with the measured deliberateness of a 71-year-old man who has learned to move with intention because he understands that every movement is a choice. He stopped in front of his granddaughter. He looked at her. Emily looked at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then James Carter said quietly, so that it was almost only for her, I owe you an explanation. Emily said, you don't have to. Yes, he said, I do. He was quiet for a moment. When your father died, he said, I made a decision. I decided that if I stepped in, if I used my name and my position to put a cushion under you, to smooth the path, to make things easier, I would be taking something from you. He held her gaze. I would be taking the chance to find out who you were on your own. And I believed I had to believe that who you were on your own was worth finding out. Emily's jaw tightened slightly, 1 degree. I watched you from a distance, he said. Every assignment, every evaluation, every time someone underestimated you and you refused to perform for them. He paused. I watched you become the person your father always told me you would become. Emily looked at him. He talked about me, she said. It came out less steady than everything else she had said that morning. Constantly, James Carter said. Every call home, every letter, every time I spoke to him, he talked about you. His voice was very level, but the effort of keeping it that way was visible if you knew where to look, and Emily knew where to look because she had the same habit. He told me you were going to do something that mattered. He told me you were patient in the way that very few young people are patient, not because you were passive, but because you understood that the right moment was worth waiting for. Emily pressed her lips together, just briefly. He was right, James Carter said. The room was completely silent. Then James Carter did something that nobody in that room had been told to expect, and that nobody who witnessed it ever forgot. He stepped back. He looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at Lawson. Something passed between the three of them, not a signal at Oakley, but a shared understanding that the moment had arrived. Hayes reached up and removed his ceremonial gloves and held Emily's gaze. And then slowly and deliberately, General Michael Hayes, 4-star commander of Special Operations Command, lowered himself onto one knee. The room stopped breathing. Torres against the left wall felt the air leave her body. Davis uncrossed his arms. Webb blinked once slowly, the way a person blinks when something has exceeded every expectation they were carrying into a room. Hayes looked up at Emily from one knee. "We are not kneeling because of your rank," he said. "We are kneeling because you reminded us what this uniform actually means." Then Lawson knelt. The most decorated female officer in a generation, silver-haired 4 stars, 30 years of service, on one knee. "You showed courage before anyone gave you the authority to show it," she said. "And that is the only kind that counts." Then James Carter, 71 years old, retired, the grandfather who had watched from a distance for a decade, who had made the hardest decision. A person who loves someone can make the decision to let them find their own way, knelt in front of the granddaughter he had not allowed himself to hold close. "You showed us," he said, "that Andrew Carter's service didn't end when he died." His voice broke on the last word. Just once, he let it. "It continued," he said, "in you." Emily stood in front of 3 generals on their knees and 9 stars between them. She stood at attention. Her eyes were bright. She did not let the tears fall, not because she was fighting them, but because she was not the kind of person who needed the room to see what she was feeling. She had always kept the deepest things for herself, not out of coldness, but out of the particular privacy of someone who understands that some emotions are too real to perform. But everyone in that room saw it anyway, because you cannot stand in front of something this large and this true and hide every part of what it does to you. Torres saw it, Davis saw it, Webb saw it, and the man with 3 combat tours and a scar he never talked about looked at the floor for a moment, which was the closest Webb ever came to showing that something had gotten through. Hayes spoke from his knee. "Private First Class Emily Carter," he said, "what you have done in 6 weeks at this installation under evaluation conditions designed to find every limit you have is this: you have demonstrated that the most important qualities in a soldier are not the ones that can be assigned or promoted or decorated. They exist first. The rank comes after." He stood. Lawson stood. James Carter stood slowly, and when he was upright, he looked at Emily for a long moment. Then he did the thing he had not allowed himself to do in 10 years. He opened his arms. Emily looked at him. For 1 second, she was not a soldier. She was not a private or an element lead or the quiet girl who showed up early and stayed late. She was a 24-year-old woman who had lost her father at 14 and had spent 10 years building something out of that loss, and the man standing in front of her with his arms open was the last living piece of the family she had grown up in. She stepped forward. She let him hold her. His arms were shaking slightly. Hers were not. Held him steady, because that was who she was. That was who she had always been. The room remained silent. Nobody looked away. When they separated, James Carter held her at arm's length and looked at her face with the expression of a man who is memorizing something. "I'm sorry it took this long," he said. "You didn't do it wrong," Emily said. "You did it the way he would have wanted." James Carter closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he nodded. When the formal elements of the ceremony were complete, and the room had shifted from the weight of the structured moment into the less defined, more human space that follows ceremonies, when the ranks and the formality recede and people are simply people again, the unit gathered around Emily in the way that groups gather around someone when they have decided collectively and without announcement that this person is one of them. Torres reached her first. She did not say anything elaborate. She said, "I told you, first day, I told you this place was going to figure out who you were." Emily looked at her. "You didn't tell me that," Emily said. "I thought it," Torres said, loudly. Emily almost smiled. Davis arrived next. He stood in front of her for a moment. "The drainage channel," he said. "Yes," Emily said. "I should have said thank you for that weeks ago," Davis said. "You saw the problem and you let me find it myself." He stopped. "That's a harder thing to do than just pointing it out." "You needed to trust your own call on the route," Emily said. "You wouldn't have trusted it if I'd handed it to you." Davis looked at her. "That's a very specific understanding of how I work," he said. "I paid attention," Emily said. Davis was quiet for the moment. "Your father trained you," he said. "He showed me," Emily said. "I decided the rest." Davis nodded, then he extended his hand. Emily shook it. It was not a performative gesture. It was the handshake of 2 soldiers who have covered hard ground together and have arrived eventually at a place of genuine respect. Webb appeared at Davis's shoulder. He looked at Emily. He said, "The circuit. Day 1. You ran the second half of the load carry when nobody told you to." "Yes," Emily said. "I knew then," Webb said. "Knew what?" Emily said. That you weren't going to leave, he said. That you were going to be, he paused, and for Webb, who said almost nothing, the pause was meaningful. That you were going to be the kind of soldier people talk about later. Emily looked at him. You were wrong about something, she said. Webb raised an eyebrow. You said she won't last 2 weeks, Emily said. Day one, I heard it. Webb said nothing for a moment. Then you heard that. I hear most things, Emily said. Webb looked at her steadily. I was wrong, he said. Yes, Emily said. You were. She said it without harshness, just as a fact. Webb almost smiled. Across the room, General Hayes was speaking with Mitchell in a low voice, and Emily caught the phrase operational designation and her own name used in the same sentence, and she filed it away without reacting to it because there would be time for that conversation, and this was not that time. This time was for something else. James Carter found her again at the edge of the room away from the main gathering. He had a photograph in his hand. He held it out to her. Emily looked at it. It was her father, young, 30-something, in uniform, standing in a staging area with a group of soldiers caught in an unposed moment, arms crossed, watching something off camera with that specific calm attention. Emily had never seen this photograph. She looked at it for a long time. He sent it to me from deployment, James Carter said. He said he wanted me to have a picture of him doing what he was built to do. He paused. I've kept it for 12 years. Emily looked up from the photograph. You're giving it to me, she said. It belongs to you, he said. It always did. Emily looked at the photograph again. Her father's eyes, her eyes, the same quality, the same direction. She thought about the photograph she carried in her notebook. The worn one with the creased edges that she had held so many times the paper had softened. She had looked at it in the dark on her first night at Fort Liberty and told herself he would say, keep going. She had kept going, and this was where keeping going had brought her. To a room full of people who had decided she was worth showing up for. To the truth about what her father had done. To the grandfather who had loved her by letting her be free. To the moment where every early morning and every late night and every time she had stayed when it would have been easier to go had accumulated into something that 3 4-star generals had knelt for. Not the rank, the person. She looked at James Carter. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything, he said. Did he know, she said, that morning, before he went back the 3rd time, did he know he wasn't coming back? James Carter was quiet for a long moment. I think, he said slowly, that he knew it was possible, and he went back anyway. He looked at her, because he was the kind of man who, when faced with a choice between the possible and the right, chose the right. Every time. Emily held that. Yeah, she said quietly. That sounds like him. James Carter put his hand on her shoulder. Just briefly, the way a person touches something they have missed for a very long time and are being very careful with because they don't want to break the moment. Then he stepped back. He would have loved watching you today, he said. Emily looked at the photograph in her hands, at her father's eyes, at the man who had been built for exactly what he did and had done it completely all the way to the end. He did watch, she said. She said it simply, not as mysticism, not as grief-softened wishful thinking, as the statement of someone who has lived for 10 years inside the values of a person they lost and understands at a level that doesn't require explanation, that the people we carry inside us are never entirely absent. Andrew Carter had watched. Every early morning, every late night, every time she had chosen the harder, right over the easier wrong. He had been there. In the discipline he had shown her, in the patience he had modeled, in the specific shape of the choices she had made without knowing she was making them in his image. He had watched, and he had been proud. She was certain of it. In the years that followed, when soldiers at Fort Liberty asked the veterans about the quiet private who had arrived one foggy morning and changed the shape of everything, the veterans always paused before answering. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because the true answer was not simple, and they had learned to respect what was not simple. They said she was the kind of person who walked in ready, stayed until she was finished, and never once asked anyone to notice the difference. They said she made everyone around her better, not by outshining them, but by creating the conditions in which they could be their best. The way a person with a compass doesn't carry everyone to the destination. They show the direction and trust people to walk. They said the 3 generals who knelt for her were not kneeling for a private. They were kneeling for what she represented, For the proof that the best things in a person cannot be manufactured by rank or forged by institution or handed down by connection. They grow in the quiet in the early mornings, in the years of preparation that nobody witnesses, in the choices made when nobody is watching, and the only accountability is internal. They were kneeling for Andrew Carter's daughter, who had decided at 14 years old, standing at the edge of a grief that could have hollowed her out, that the most honest way to honor the man she had lost was to become slowly and completely, and without asking permission, the kind of person he had been, and had done exactly that. Emily Carter walked into Fort Liberty as the new girl nobody counted. She walked out as the soldier nobody forgot, not because she demanded to be remembered, because she had lived every single day in a way that made forgetting impossible. That was Andrew Carter's legacy, carried forward, completed by the daughter who had never stopped walking toward it.